KR King here, talking today about why undead are such a classic monster, certainly of D&D and many other fantasy-based RPG games. And thinking about why this occurs, I think helps you think about integrating them into your own homebrewed world. And this is in no particular order of importance. I'll just say number one is that the undead have universal appeal across all cultures in the world because everyone dies, right? It's the one experience that all of us will have and none of us can share. You can't ask anyone, so how was your death? And so this taps into primal universal emotions. Fear of death, fear of the unknown, wondering about the afterlife, what happens to us after we have experienced this shared experience that no one can describe. And the idea of something coming back from the dead is transgressive, taboo, ideas about decay, about, perverting the natural order, because death is a natural part of life, the termination of that condition. And this is why it ties into so much of our mythology, of our literature. The touchstone literature, Lord of the Rings, has the Nazgul undead, the Barrow Wights. We see this in many other fantasy novels. We see this across mythology, things like ghouls, like vampires, ghosts, of course, again, across all cultures, a form of undead, someone who either can't accept the fact that they're dead or is trapped there for some reason. And it denotes that there's this area between this world and the next where souls can become trapped either by choice or by accident. And this raises questions about the sanctity of life or death. If a ghost is there, is it better to destroy the ghost or guide it back to the next world? Do you have evil necromancers or people that, use forbidden rites to create undead creatures? And so this universal nature of undead makes it kind of a cornerstone of the way your society works in a fantasy setting where there is magic. There actually are zombies and wights and wraiths and vampires. Everyone knows that they really exist, and this changes the way people think about that area between life and death. So you have in a D&D setting a person who gains such power that they want to deny death itself, the Lich. And number two, the undead work so well in terms of the mechanics of an RPG fantasy style setting. Because you're using all these different undead tropes from literature and folklore, you have a huge variety. So you have things ranging from zombies and skeletons up through ghouls and wraiths to vampires and the aforementioned super deadly Lich. And in each case, the capabilities and the strength of these creatures fits into different storylines, combat encounters, and situations in your world. Some are just going to be, the minions of various undead creatures that the players dispatch or not early on, whereas others can become the nemesis of a campaign world. And tying into this is both traditional capabilities or folkloric capabilities of undead can be worked into mechanics, but also anything that you choose. Any life form can be undead. So you could have undead plants, undead fungus, whatever you want. And therefore, the mechanical aspects of those creatures can reflect both their undead status and the corruptive, necrotic power that we inherently assume are going to be part of the undead creature. So obviously, in the old days, the life drain was the most feared of the undead capabilities. But you can have others, necrotic damage that stays with you in a sort of Pathfinder setting, the mummy rot that gets into you, because you have in here this corruptive, anti-life power that courses through undead. And so this translates so well to many of the, potential injuries and nasty forces that we have in a D&D setting. So the third thing that undead are really cool for is iconic villains. Because when we think of literature, let's say the Nazgul in Lord of the Rings, man, are they a great villain, right? And one could argue Sauron is also undead in some sense. But in any case, when the Nazgul come to attack Frodo and the hobbits at that thing there, they're relentless, and they show them in the movie on the horse with the maggots coming out of it. They're tremendous villains because they represent pure evil. They represent something that is antithetical to life, antithetical to the forces through which we think, goodness and all the values that we cherish they're the opposite of that, because they are attempting to do something unnatural, right? They are attempting to deny death. And then, of course, the vampire figure, sometimes people think of them as sort of tragic figures. They can never die. But, in the D&D setting, or fantasy setting, they are usually pretty evil, right? Strahd is not, you're out to destroy him, right? And that's what makes them so great. They have these tremendous powers, these capabilities, but the players, there's nothing wrong with destroying them, right? You can get ambiguous with living creatures, right? Like the ones that are really evil, maybe not so much. But an undead is unnatural. It needs to be returned. It needs to be annihilated. And that's what you want with your villains. As I mentioned, the Lich, these are so powerful. When just creating them is a lot of fun. Your players knowing about them. And again, these really powerful ones can tie into a longer storyline such that some great evil has appeared in the misty woods over here, and the players get closer and closer, and there's rumors about it and whatnot. They don't meet it right away, but as they get closer and closer, they start to suspect, I think this may be a Lich. And a Lich is deadly. The Tomb of Horrors was a tomb of a Lich, right? Except it had great rewards at the end. They've collected over their unnaturally long, life, all sorts of treasures and magic and whatnot. And it's a lure, and you're getting rid of something that is inherently a bad thing to have on the material plane. So the fourth reason that undead are such an iconic monster and such a part of an RPG setting is the ease of use with which you can plug it in to the various terrain settings and locales of your world. They're universal. People die everywhere. They're not necessarily in one place, although we tend to put them in remote, gloomy locations, but really they can go anywhere. Undead there are graveyards all over the world. There are places where tragedies have occurred and a ghost refuses to leave. But in addition, of course, to the places that we might think swamps or bogs or, even maybe some Arctic waste where things that, first of all, life bothers them or whatever. So they might gravitate towards these lonely, remote spots where they can just bemoan their fate. Now, obviously, if they have to feed on things, say the vampire, they're going to lurk somewhere where they can get that. But again, maybe those vampires are feeding on various animals and they just need life to drain the blood. And so there's where you get your undead animals. And the theme of corruption goes everywhere too, whether it's the corruption that has of sentient creatures, whether it's a corruption of some plague, some magical calamity that occurred and brought things up to life in an unnatural, undead way. It's very easy to just come up with storylines and incorporate an undead element once you've got the parameters down that it was once dead, now it's alive. What are the means for which it has to survive? Like a ghost is just haunting an area. And then what are the means by which you can destroy it? And the fifth reason for why undeads are so iconic is the flavor, the visual imagery, the atmosphere that we associate with undead. The horror aspect, being creeped out, scary. We love the remote castle that's been abandoned for hundreds of years, although who knows what dwells there. A crypt or a graveyard is an inherently creepy place. And in a world where things really do rise up from the grave, it has an extra effect. Anything that is lonely, anything that is tragic, ruined. Think about an abandoned building. If you've ever gone into one, it's scary. Where people once lived, lives are evident there, but it's all trashed out. It's all decayed. It all represents loss. It all represents an end of something. This is what the undead give in terms of setting up this atmosphere, setting up the environment with which your stories are going to unfold and which your players are going to inhabit. Because as they move through the world, it's one thing to you go to a village and you meet some people and, there's some orcs that are harassing. Okay, we'll go fight those or whatever. But now you're going to go deep into this old forest, to this city, the dead city. There was a plague. Everyone left or died. And now all that remains are the rotting hulks of these buildings. And it's rumored that there are undead there of all kinds. And the players go there because they've heard some story of some treasure in this place, but they know what they're preparing for as they move deeper and deeper into these woods. It's going to be scary. It's going to be creepy. There's going to be undead. And this flavor and this atmosphere that all relates back to the mythology and the stories and the idea that this is inherently wrong. It goes against everything we know that is natural because, of course, we know we don't like the fact that we're all going to die. We fear that, but we also know that that's the natural order of things. All things pass. And anything that is brought back or refuses to pass is unnatural, is creepy. Everything about the undead, all the aspects that we were just talking about, that universal tie-in between the fact that we're all dying and all the literature and mythology, combined with the ideas I talked about in terms of game mechanics, make the undead, one of the iconic figures of an RPG setting. And I want to do a shout out to my Patreon supporters. This week, the Knight supporters will get a PDF in which I'm going to talk about some specific ideas for undead settings that you can use in your world. And for my Duke supporters, of course, they will also get the PDF. But in addition, I'm going to do a video in which I go over some films and books and stories that I think help inspire really cool undead encounters and storylines in your world. And if you like what you've seen on my channel, please subscribe. Always looking for more. I'd love to hear some stories about undead in your world and what you think about them. And most importantly, keep playing an RPG game, whichever one you choose, and tell somebody else about it.